Good morning. Welcome to Tribal Jazzman Scholar. I want to talk a little bit about an indigenous way of existing in wild nature in the world. It has relevance to the way we conceptualize the brain hemispheres. But let me not get too deep into that. Let me just first say I have an anecdote of my own. I traveled in the Amazon. I went fairly deep into the Amazon in Peru, and I did that by interviewing guides in a small village, Yarinacocha, near a lake, which was about a half an hour from Pucallpa. And I interviewed guides over several days, and I was looking for somebody who could take me into the jungle north up the Rio Ucayali, into a natural preserve, an area of Peru that was hands-off to logging. And I ended up hiring a couple of guides, and this one gentleman, his name was Mauro, he would constantly be sitting at the front of this peki canoe dugout as we were heading up this large river at the beginning of our trip, and he would be looking out for logs, because if the canoe struck a log as it was heading upriver, it could damage the canoe, it could even sink the canoe, so he had to keep an eye out for logs. And we were in a very wide river, probably at least a half mile across, and yet he would continually point to the shore to draw our attention to various animals that he could see, like alligators, crocodiles, wild boar, anything he could see, monkeys, he could see them on the shore. And I'm watching the shore the entire time, and I can't make anything out. It's so far away. But when he would point and say, "Look, ronsoko," or "Look, cocodrilo," I would see it because he could point to where it was. And but what amazed me was his ability to perceive in his peripheral vision animals on the shores of this river while looking straight ahead to make sure that no logs struck the boat. There's a perceptual phenomenon among people who have spent their lives in wild nature. It's a deep sensitivity to what enters the mind through the sensory organs, eyes, ears, nose, skin. And part of what has allowed that heightened level of sensitivity and awareness is the very innate tendency, capacity of people in wild nature, and even people in present world, such as myself. When I spend time in wild nature, there's a tendency of the mind to become quiet. And when I say the mind, I'm referring in this case to what we generally consider left hemisphere, linguistic, linear, rational, logical, sequential thought, the part of the brain occupied with ideas, and engaging in internal chatter and thought. Many people driving automobiles can get so caught up in their thoughts that they miss their exit. They're not even sensorily aware of a familiar environment, so that they can take a cue to pull off a freeway or a road because they're so caught up in that mind. So when traditional peoples, nature-based peoples, tribal peoples are living their entire lives in wild nature, and many of them subsisting off of the food sources that wild nature provides, they have a capacity to very consistently quiet that linear left hemisphere, that thinking, cognitive, chattering left brain, such that they are able to perceive at a much higher level through their sensory organs. I'm also reminded of an anecdote in the book by Jean Liedloff. Her book is entitled The Continuum Concept, one of the only books, perhaps the only book she ever wrote in the 70s, after spending a great deal of time in the Amazon with traditional peoples. And she relates a story of being up late at night. All of her indigenous porters who were carrying her things, 7 or 8 of them were sound asleep, and she was up writing in her journal, and suddenly they all sat up and pointed off somewhere into the jungle and commented on the wild boar. And then at that moment she began to hear the rustling and the noises of the wild boar in the distance, and then all the men went right back to sleep. And she had been awake and she had heard nothing. And what she was saying was that their level of sensory sensitivity and awareness is extremely heightened, and it's fully active even when they're in deep sleep. So that a sound of a wild boar pack, the earliest indications of that pack of boar, is enough to alert them to awaken. And so that's yet another example of how human beings have a very innate capacity to be tuned into their sensory organs, but that aspect of the brain, that awareness component of our cognitive capacities, is largely resident in the right hemisphere. And when we exist for such an extended amount of our day and living in civilizations which value and honor these linear, cognitive, rational capacities of the left brain, we overvalue, overemphasize. In fact, we extend our conscious awareness almost fully into that hemisphere, and we give very little credibility and attention to the quiet mind. Of course, meditative practices and many other additions to our repertoire of being in the last 15, 20, 30 years are pointing to the significance of that quieter, more intuitive, imaginative, image-based brain, the right brain, which incidentally had been called in the biological sciences for many years the inferior lobe of the brain, and the superior lobe was considered to be the left hemisphere. They've also been largely aligned and equated with male and feminine principles, male and female principles. They do have, the genders, male and female, do have different associations with the hemispheres that are largely the result of the different hormone treatments that the fetus and then the adolescent receive. So male and female brains are different, although the differences within the genders is greater than between genders. Still, we have definite strong inclinations as male and female to lean towards the various genders. And there is a coyote. Hello, little guy. Welcome. Hopefully you could see that. And with tribal jazzman scholar and the coyotes in the Topanga Mountains, I will sign off for now.